My 1988 Saab 900 Turbo sitting right behind me here has been having an intermittent hot start issue. As I've been daily driving the car the past month or so, it hasn't had this issue once, knock on wood, but over the summer when it's a lot hotter out, it does have this issue where basically I'll go drive it somewhere, I'll park it, I'll go inside, buy my groceries, do whatever, come back out 20-30 minutes later and the car won't start. From what I've been told, that essentially means that my starter is on its way out and should be replaced. So when I bought this car from the previous owner, they thought the reason it didn't start, period, was because the starter itself was bad. It ended up being a different issue. So I actually have a spare starter to already throw in the car. And if you look, you can see its location is just right down under here. So we're gonna have to take a few things off, including the air intake, probably the intercooler. We might be able to get away without doing the intercooler. All this intake piping, things like that, the flywheel cover, and then we should be able to take out our starter. It's off screen here, but there's a little T10 right against the fender here that holds the air box on. Mounts right there. Now we can pop off the other side of this intake tube that connects to the turbo. Old hose right here is really stuck on. So I just used some pliers to squeeze and twist it. It popped off pretty easily. Also pull that vacuum line off. Now we can take off our flywheel cover. There's supposed to be some 10 millimeters holding this in. Mine's just kind of sitting here covering it. One other important point I forgot to mention as I'm struggling with this cover here for the flywheel is to disconnect your battery. So I'm gonna do that now, both terminals. That took quite a lot of struggling. I popped off the little cover here and kind of was sticking a couple fingers in there and I helped pull it and it eventually came out towards me, towards the driver's side. But yeah, that was not fun. Probably took me as long to remove that as it did for me to remove everything else. Now we have access to our two bolts for the starter. You can see one right there and the other one right back there. On the back here, we do have some wires to disconnect and it also looks like there's a small little bracket. You can see one of the bolts for it on the screen. I'll put an arrow pointing to it. And then the other bolt is right below that, but let's go ahead and do that next. The two bolts on the front here are both 14 millimeters. One thing to note, there is a nut on the back of this. So I'm holding the nut with one finger and loosening with my other hand. There's one bolt out right there. Back one is definitely a lot less easy to get to. Just trying to prevent dropping this nut. Right in the middle of the screen there, you can see all of the wires that go to the starter. There's two power cables and there's the one little ground that we just have to unplug here. At least I assume that's a ground. I could be wrong. All right, there's that little nut. Last item we have here is there's a bracket that's really difficult to get to. You can see one of the bolts right there. I think they look like 2 13 millimeters. So I'm gonna try and buzz both of those off real quick. Oh, it's not a 13, it looks like a 12. Oh my gosh. A 12, 13, and a 14, all used to hold the starter in. Thank you, Saab. Making it so easy on me. There's a radiator hose in the way here. I'm kind of fighting because of this bracket I just had to disconnect. The bracket can also be disconnected in a different spot, but it looked like those were very hard to get to. Here we have our old starter and then the new starter. I went ahead and popped this bracket off. I got so desperate trying to pull the starter out that I started to try to loosen this bracket. It was super difficult. I eventually got one of the bolts off, and then the second one I just couldn't get to, so I figured just a little bit more prying and getting it around that radiator hose gave me enough clearance to get it around this bracket, because this bracket is what really held me up. So what we're gonna do now is swap the bracket over to our new starter. You can see this bracket has a little bit of play in it, so I'm not gonna tighten it down the whole way. Just enough to where it should only take 1 or 2 turns when I get it back in the car. And lastly, we can pop off the old cut ends on the last one. One thing to note is there's actually 2 spots here where this negative, or again, I'm assuming it's a negative, it's yellow, but I'm not sure where this ground can go or where this cable can go. You can either go right there on top, or there's another spot underneath. This one was empty on my car, there's nothing plugged into that, so I'm assuming that's correct, but I'm just gonna plug these in to the old starter, just so that way I 100% make sure I'm connecting them to the right spot. There's a few important pieces here. So you have one of your power cables, the other cable, and then there's a little washer, and then on top of that you have your nut that holds it all on. I have the starter roughly in place. You can see it wiggling right there. I put this first bolt in just to sort of hold it. I think I, in retrospect, should have done these 2 bolts last on the removal because they're the easiest. But I got impatient and did them first. I'm actually going to use a magnet to drop this nut roughly into place here, just because it's just about impossible to reach. This actually works, I'll be so happy. Oh, that actually worked. Wow. Cool. So both of these are started. Now what I'm gonna do is line up this bracket in the back that bolts to the motor, and then get both of those 12 millimeters zapped in. We can tighten down these 2 little 8 mils the rest of the way now. We can tighten down these in the front the rest of the way. Although I am noticing on both of these, when you get close to being tight, the nut actually stops rotating, which helps. So you can kind of do it with your finger, and then when it gets tight enough, you can just tighten it like a normal bolt. There we go, so our starter is 100% in place. Lastly, now we can do all of our cables down here. First, we have our little 2-sided bracket. We'll slide on and stick our 2 red cables on. There's one. I think this one might actually be the ground. And lastly, our little metal washer, which admittedly, when I took this off, I'm 99% sure I lost. I can't find it anywhere, but thankfully I had the one off the new starter. And we can just put our 13 mil washer on the end, or nut, excuse me. I'm gonna hand tighten it. And then lastly, we can't forget our little single plug right here. And there we go. Next we can put our flywheel cover on. Same thing with removal. This took so long to get positioned properly. A lot of bending, a lot of careful prying. I don't have any good advice to offer for how to get this thing into place because it is just a pain no matter how you try to do it. You can hopefully move forward now though with the rest of all these air intake and charge pipes, so this should, fingers crossed, be a lot more straightforward and easy. So let's finish up getting this thing back together. With all that back together, last thing we need to do is reconnect the battery. I'm gonna clean up a bit and we can try and start it out. All right, moment of truth here, come on. Wow, one thing I noticed right off the bat is that that starter sounded a whole lot different than the other one does. Now if the car starts misfiring a lot, it's because I'm currently trying to fix a misfire issue. So if you hear that, yeah, now it's starting to do it, and it actually just died. But this at least solves, hopefully, my hot start issue. I obviously won't know until the summer when I drive this over the summer. But at least that's the replacement of a starter on a classic Saab 900. There's not really any good videos out there on how to do it. And if you come over here to the Bentley manual, look at how that tells you to do it. This is super unhelpful. This is page 331-2 of the Bentley manual. It says, disconnect the negative terminal, remove any hoses that may be in the way, disconnect the large battery cable and the wire on the starter motor, remove the 2 bolts holding the starter to the engine. Installation is reverse the removal. Usually this thing is super helpful when it comes to repairs, but here it was absolutely no help whatsoever. But thank you guys all so much for watching. I'm gonna have to dig back into this misfire issue in the meantime, but see y'all next time.